It's funny because I knew I was going to be recording this week, so of course my shadow has been kicking my butt and talking me out of it and trying to tell me I don't know what I'm doing and there's no benefit to helping people work with the shadow. But all around me, I know it's not true because in the past few years, it's become so apparent just how loud our darkness is. And, what even is the shadow? It's interesting because most people associate the term shadow with Carl Jung back in the 21st century, where he started sort of dividing up the different parts of the human personality into different sections and referred to the shadow as the dark part of our personality. And even there's a collective shadow he speaks of with the dark part of humanity. And then he goes on to sort of talk about other parts like our animal side and things similar to Freud where it's like the superego and like your higher self, things like that. But realistically, the shadow isn't something that you can easily just divide into little parts. And even that is sort of a side effect of the part of ourselves that created the shadow in the first place. So when we go back even further and look at the human mind and how it's evolved, one of the positives that have become a negative for the human mind is its deep need to separate out everything into compartments. And originally, when we were, closer to animals than humans, there was obviously a benefit to compartmentalizing everything or judging everything as good or bad. If you found a new food, it was good to know whether you could eat it. So judgment was a necessity to survival. Finding out if where you were living was going to last you through the winter required judgment. You needed to be able to say, is this good? Is this bad? And then at some point, we evolved to having so much ability to problem solve and help ourselves that realistically we didn't have to think very much about what we were doing to survive. We already had figured out what foods we could eat or where we could live or clothing. We had most of the basics figured out, but we still had this brain that had developed to judge. And in a way, it kind of took on a life of its own where it wanted to be able to continue to decide what we were doing with our lives. But if we already had everything figured out, it had to come up with another way of being purposeful. And in that way, we started to become our own problem. Of all the species, we're one of the only ones that does things like extinct other species for no real reason or destroys the world around us without giving any major survival benefit to ourselves. These are all things that the mind helps us do to help itself have a purpose. And a lot of the suffering that we have in this world is self-created. And then after it did this thing where it created this part of ourselves that was destructive, it didn't want us to get rid of that, so it had to hide it. So now we have a shadow, this dark part of ourselves that some people say you can't even see yourself. So a lot of times we see it in other people. And I notice it a lot with people talking about their religion, how the other religions are wrong and evil, or other beliefs are wrong or evil. And there's also just, your next door neighbor is wrong because they're doing something different than you, and that makes them bad. So we started putting shadows everywhere but in ourselves. And we started to develop a lot of different methods for not spending time with our darkness. So we have computers and we have TV and we have food that we don't always need. And we have parties and loud events we go to and things that are so distracting that there's just no way to sit with ourselves. And it's gone on long enough now that no one wants to be with themselves. And if they are with themselves for any minute, it feels weird and awkward and very uncomfortable for some of us. So we quickly turn on music or call a friend, anything we can do to kind of take us out of ourselves. And unfortunately, while it's enjoyable to do all these things, it's let our shadows get darker and harder to see, to the point where we're destroying our own lives and the lives of the people around us. And maybe each one of us personally isn't doing that much harm, but unfortunately the collective is causing a lot of problems. But realistically, we're not here to solve everyone's problems because it's too big an ask to try to solve all the problems. And even that thought is something our mind uses to stop us from getting better, because it allows us to get overwhelmed by all the problems that we could be fixing. The nice thing about shadow work is that even if you just do a little bit of it with yourself, the cumulative effect is that it just gets better for everything and everyone around you, because you're just not going to bring the same amount of darkness into the world. So how do we do shadow work? Well, there's different methods and lots of different tricks, but the essential idea is to bring awareness into the shadow, or light into the darkness. Because if you stare at anything long enough, it comes into focus. It's not really any different than if you were to go outside at night and stand still long enough for your eyes to adapt and you could see. But it does take time to actually look long enough to adjust your eyes. And shadow work does take a little bit of effort. It's not the same as taking a pill. It's not a quick surgery. It's a process of evolution, which is something that we're all inclined to do, which is why we're here now, to start working on lightening up our darkness so that we can keep moving forward. Because right now it's dragging us down, it's tripping us up a lot. So we're going to start working every week with little things we can start doing. And if you're here right now, I can only assume the darkness has got a little bit too dark for you. So every Sunday we'll get together, start looking at different methods of creating more light, and without it being the sort of socially acceptable light that seems to be pushed on us right now, the fabricated joy and happiness, positivity that we see. It's going to be more of a lightning or a natural peace finding amongst all the noise and the chaos. So it's going to look different. Whether you know it or not, the shadow doesn't want you to look into it. So you might be stepping out of your comfort zone here with me. But if you join me here every week, we'll find a way to stare into the darkness together.